Hey guys, so in this quick screencast, we're going to be covering the 13 levels of biological organization. You might remember that last week in class, we spent some time with the 13 cards and a big picture of a pyramid in masking tape on the floor of our classroom. And you guys worked on unscrambling these levels, and we briefly reviewed them. But this screencast is just going to give you a little bit more detail about how we might be experiencing these 13 levels of organization throughout this year. So as we go through, um, I want you to take out your page 5 notes, and you should recognize this pyramid as being in there. So these are the 13 levels in order that you should have kind of committed to memory. So as we go through, feel free to fill out page 5 of your notes. But also on page 6 of your notes, you'll notice that there's a table that also uses the levels that we're about to discuss. So as we go through the screencast, you're welcome to kind of jot down notes, but for the completion of this, especially for examples, you'll want to check in your textbook, which each of you guys have a textbook at home now. So you can use the textbook to find an official definition and an example, but by all means, feel free to jot down examples of these as we go through the screencast. Okay, so we're going to start at the very beginning. And we always kind of start with the smallest and we work our way down because as biologists, we need to know each of these levels in detail in order to understand our living world around us. So the smallest level of organization is an atom. And an atom is the absolute smallest particle of matter. Atoms are considered non-living and they contain 3 different subatomic particles that you might have learned about in the 7th or 8th grade. Protons that are positive, neutrons that are neutral, they have no charge, and electrons that are negative. We'll learn a lot more about atoms in our next biochemistry unit. When atoms bond together, we form molecules. So molecules are any time you have 2 or more atoms bound together. They form these things called compounds that exist from different elements coming together. They are also considered non-living. In that molecule category, we're also going to spend a lot of time this year talking about one specific type of molecule. Let's see if you can break down this word. These molecules called macromolecule. And I don't know if I've ever told you this in class before, but biologists are not creative when we name things. So we came up with this term macro because macro means big, and molecule, of course, means molecule. So the term macromolecule means big molecules. And in bio, we focus on 4 main macromolecules: carbs, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. These large molecules are going to be the molecules that make up our body. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about that in our next unit, and these are, of course, non-living molecules. The third level of organization would be inside of cells. These are called organelles. And in class, we learned that this roughly translates into little organs or tiny organs, because when scientists first looked at cells under microscopes, they said, hey, those are like little functioning organs within the cell, so they named them organelles. And these organelles are made up of mitochondria. You can see that the 2 that are pictured here on the right is the mitochondria. You can see those little squiggly folds inside of the mitochondria. We'll learn those are the folds of the mitochondrial matrix. You can also see in the left, that would be an image of a cell, and then the inside would be the nucleus. So things like mitochondria, nucleus, lysosomes, ribosomes, Golgi, ER, things like that would be organelles. And that, of course, brings us to the overall cell. So the 4th level is cells. And cells we're going to learn are made up of those organelles. They are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. So if you might remember our characteristics of life, all living things must be made out of cells. So they're a pretty important part, and we'll spend an entire unit learning about cells and how they grow and divide. This is the first level of organization that we say that life can exist at, because unicellular organisms that are made out of one cell can be considered alive. We're going to learn also this year that there are 2 types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotes mean that they don't have nuclei. Those are examples of things like bacteria. And then, of course, we, being humans, we are eukaryotes. We are more complex. We have nuclei, and we'll find out that we have also lots of membrane-bound organelle. And that leads us to tissues. So tissues are whenever we have the same type of specific cell working together for a common good. Tissue is considered living as well. So you can see that there are 3 examples of cells that all look very, very different within our body. The cells on the left are called cartilage cells or chondrocytes. The cells in the center are called bone cells or osteocytes. And then the cells on the right are called red blood cells or erythrocytes. So these different cells have different structures. They are different shapes, and they all serve different purposes. The key for this is that all bone cells will function together for a common good, which means that they are known as a tissue. A really common misconception is that skin is actually a tissue. Skin is actually an organ because it's made of many different types of tissue, many different types of skin cells. So in your skin, you have your epithelial tissue, you have your dermal tissue, your hypodermal tissue, and different layers that make up your skin. So your skin is actually one of your largest organs in your body. Speaking of organs, organs are whenever we have many tissues working together for a common function. So here's a picture of the organ known as the heart. You, of course, could talk about the pancreas or the liver or the spleen, the intestines, the lungs. I could go on and on. Anytime tissues are working together, and organs are also considered living. So that brings us to organ systems. And that's when we have many different organs that are functioning together for the common good. Organ systems are known as living. So there are 12 organ systems in the human body, systems like the skeletal system, the muscular system, the lymphatic system, reproductive system, cardiovascular system, lymphatic system, the nervous system. These are whenever those organs come together and work together, right? So that brings us to the always interesting organism. All right, so at this level, this is the entire being of that living thing. It's usually made up of those organ systems, and we consider organisms to either be unicellular or multicellular. Uni, of course, meaning one, multi meaning many. And of course, these are living organisms. Now, in the activity that we did in class, you might remember that a lot of people struggled mixing up this level of organization, population, with the next level of organization, which is community. And I understand that confusion because when we think of a population, we think of like the population of the United States. And we think of community, we think of like our small little community, like the York suburban community, or maybe the neighborhood that you live in, or your church community. But really, a population is defined by saying it's the same type, and I would even say it's the same species of organisms living together in one space. So a population would really include, like, for example, the wolf population of Yellowstone National Park. So only wolves, one species, and within a certain boundary. If you compare that to the 10th level of biological organization, a community would be several of those populations living together. So instead of it just being the wolf population of Yellowstone, it would be the wolf population, the rabbit population, the population of trees and insects and bugs that help that area all function together. So this is when multiple populations come together. Okay, so be careful of those two, because in my experience, those are the two that my students get confused the most often. So that leads us to 11, which is ecosystem, a term most of us have heard of. So to understand an ecosystem, you need to understand the two terms biotic and abiotic. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but biologists are not creative when we name things, right? And biology is the study of life. Bio means life. So anything that is considered biotic means that that thing is alive. So an ecosystem is when we combine biotic or living communities, but then we add in the abiotic. And you guys know in English class, whenever you add an A in front of the word, it means the opposite of. So abiotic features would be non-living features. So a great example of that in this image, you can see it's not only the frog and the dragonfly and the bee and the bird and the plants, it's also the mountains and the streams and the water and the temperature and the area around. So ecosystems include living and non-living features. When we look at ecosystems around the Earth, we can see that there are some commonalities. So for example, there are multiple rainforests throughout the world. So there are rainforests in parts of Asia. There are rainforests in South America. There's also one rainforest, a temperate rainforest in America in Washington State. So we clump these biomes as similar areas, similar ecosystems that have similar flora and fauna, and also share rainfall, climate, and weather that are similar to each other. So another great example of this is that there are multiple deserts throughout the world. So desert would be an example of a biome. So would tundra, taiga, grassland, many of those that you might have learned about earlier in your science education. And that, of course, leads us to the biosphere. And of course, biologists are not creative when we name things. You can break down that word biosphere, and it literally means circle of life. All right, cue the Lion King theme song. But biosphere literally means everything that is alive on Earth, and it actually includes a layer around the globe. So the biosphere is how biologists refer to as the entire world. And we say that the biosphere, it includes things like the atmosphere, which is living things and how they interact with the air and the clouds, the ecosphere, which is more ecosystems, the hydrosphere, which is our water cycle, the lithosphere, which is more of the dirt and rock and minerals that are found in our soil. So collectively, we call those the biosphere. So those are our 13 levels of organization. And what I would suggest for you is to kind of go back to your page 5 and 6 of your notes. Make sure that you have these 13 levels down. Spend some time. I left a clue for you that in order to find more examples in your textbook of 2.1, of anything from atom to organism, flip to section 2.1, and you're going to find a lot more of those definitions. To get definitions for anything from organism to biosphere, if you flip to the section 3.1, you can get some great definitions there. So that is it. I hope that was helpful, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in class.